Ownership participation is oftentimes misunderstood by many members of cooperatives. And what I find is much of my job is spent trying to communicate why does a cooperative member have to have ownership in a cooperative. As we'll see in the finance section of this course, we'll talk about the balance sheet. So I've got a set of assets over here. The accounting identity says they've got to be equal to the liabilities or debt plus owner's equity. The owner's equity is typically going to be equity that the cooperative member has in the cooperative. So if I want to have an asset, if I want to have a food cooperative and I want to have a building, for example, and I want to have cash registers and shelves and inventory, I cannot finance 100% of the cooperative with debt. The same principle, by the way, is with every other transaction. Banks, for example, would like you to have 20% as a down payment on a house. When you go to buy a car or vehicle, oftentimes you're asked to put down a certain percentage or a certain dollar amount on a vehicle. The same is true in business formation. So there's an expectation that members will contribute capital to form the cooperative and keep the cooperative assets in good condition. So often on day one of the co-op's formation, we ask members to write checks, if you will, to provide the capital, or in some cases they can earn their way into the cooperative, which is common in food co-ops, where over time you contribute the amount of capital that the cooperative wants you to have. In the case of dairy cooperatives, oftentimes there's a deduction made from the milk check each week to help finance that growth and assets in the cooperative. So because the cooperative has your name on that equity, oftentimes the member think that's a bank account that they can draw upon. It's not. Your equity is invested in assets. They're invested in things like inventory. They're invested in warehouses. They're invested in stores. And so they can't make those liquid. A cooperative just can't liquidate those assets to give you your equity back. So that's why there's an expectation to participate in ownership. You would participate as being actually having a claim on the assets in the cooperative. When we think about membership, it can often be a confusing word. And if you look at my textbook, I try to break that apart. Because we're members of lots of things. We're members of Costco. You can be a member of a American Legion or a VFW club. You can be members of a fraternal benefit society. You can have membership in a number of things on the internet, movie clubs and so forth. So when you think about membership in a cooperative, though, it's very, very different. Your membership in a cooperative implies that you are participating actively in the cooperative. So when I buy a membership, for example, on Amazon Prime, I don't participate in the governance of Amazon. I don't get to vote in Amazon's board of director policies every year. I don't get to dictate how Amazon uses its funds for capital and so forth. All I'm doing is buying a transaction through Amazon Prime, and that's okay. In a cooperative, that's just the reverse. I participate in governance, I participate in economics with the profit of the cooperative, and I participate as an owner in terms of having capital in the cooperative. And we'll talk about each one of those things. But the important thing is cooperatives are participatory organizations. Oftentimes there are different classes of membership. So we can say you're a member patron or a member owner. But I'm going to just suggest on a high level for the purposes of this discussion, your membership implies you participate in governance, you participate in profits, and you participate in ownership. And so that's why we call cooperatives participatory organizations. One of the interesting things about this whole issue of proportionality, the more business I do, the more I participate in a cooperative, the more claim I have in terms on the income or net savings that the cooperative accrues every year. So if I like doing business with a cooperative, if I find the transaction benefits me versus doing business with another type of business form or another cooperative for that matter, my choice of participation dictates that I will receive back as economic benefits the proportion or percentage of business that I do with that cooperative. And so that's a very important and powerful inducement. If I like doing business with a cooperative, why wouldn't I want to do more business there? So people say, what are examples of why might I choose to do business with a food cooperative versus a conventional grocery store? So there are some things you can buy at a food co-op that you can't buy at a conventional grocery store. The other part about profitability, we think about wages. So in the case of a worker cooperative, the employees are actually owners of the cooperative. they set their own work schedules and their own salaries. So one of the reasons why people like working for a worker cooperative, these are things commonly formed in taxi organizations or artisan bakery type operations, or people that make craftsmen, or in the case of Minneapolis here, the Hub Bicycle Shop. Oftentimes they say, I don't want to be locked into working from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock. I've got other reasons. I've got childcare issues. I've got something I want to do during the middle of the week on Thursday. And so they say one of the advantages for me of being part of a worker co-op is I get to set my own hours, work as much as I want or as little as I want, help set my own salary, and I will receive the economic benefits based on how much I participate in the organization of that worker cooperative. So that's why we see worker cooperatives being formed. The other thing about a cooperative, how I participate in profits, is because most co-ops are doing business within a small geography, typically the employees all live in that geography. So I see my employees at church, I see my employees at school, I see my employees at athletic events. So it's a very much a community-wide purpose, and the profits, which are paid in terms of salary to those individuals, are oftentimes spent in the local community. So that's another way to think about participation profits. We share economically as individuals based on our participation, but the economic generation done by the cooperative is oftentimes spent locally in that community. Governance is something that most people understand or don't understand. There's really no middle ground I find when it comes to governance. And that's why we'll spend some time in the class talking about that individually. But at a high level is, as a member of the organization, I have to elect a board of directors to monitor management and hire, evaluate, compensate, and or in a worst case scenario, fire a manager. So I have to elect people on my behalf to do all these activities. So housing cooperatives, for example, will have a board of directors elected by the membership. To be on that board, you have to be a member in good standing in the cooperative. So if I'm in a worker co-op, I've got to make sure that my capital investment is all up to date before I can be on the board. If I want to run for the board of directors of a consumer cooperative or an agricultural cooperative, I can't have accounts receivable, for example, that are outstanding. So there are some limitations, but as a volunteer-based organization, as a participatory-based organization, there is an expectation that I will vote on important issues facing the cooperative, and these are typically done in the context of an annual meeting. And that's why typically when you think about annual meetings of cooperative, there's an education component and a report back to the membership of what the last 12 months were, and then an election typically, or announcing the elections, the results of an election that was done through mail ballots or electronic online balloting.